She thought she was protecting her neighborhood, but in reality, she was about to expose her own prejudice to the world. On a quiet Sunday morning, a black man returned home, proud, exhausted, and unaware that his every move was being watched from behind pristine white curtains. Moments later, flashing lights filled the street, and a call to 911 set off a chain of events no one could have predicted. What happens when entitlement meets truth, and justice answers the phone on the other end? Because sometimes karma doesn't knock, it dispatches. But first, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment below from which city you are watching this video. For years, Marcus Hall had worked tirelessly to build the kind of life his parents could only dream of. After a decade of 12-hour shifts as an EMT, he and his wife, Danielle, finally bought their first home, a modest two-story house nestled in a quiet, tree-lined cul-de-sac. It wasn't fancy, but to Marcus, it was proof that hard work and faith could carry a man further than hate ever could. Every morning, Marcus waved to the joggers, trimmed his lawn, and made sure the neighborhood kids' bikes stayed clear of the driveway. He believed in respect, in kindness, in being the kind of neighbor who brought peace, not trouble. But peace, it seemed, was not what everyone wanted. The Homeowners Association, run by a woman named Karen Whitmore, had a reputation. She called it keeping standards. Others called it something else entirely. She noticed every detail, the color of your mailbox, the length of your grass, and sometimes the color of your skin. At first, Marcus ignored the stares, the unnecessary reminders about community rules, the way Karen's smile never quite reached her eyes. He'd seen worse and thought he could rise above it. But over time, those little moments began to weigh on him, the feeling of being watched, judged, unwelcome in a place he paid for just like everyone else. Then came that Sunday morning, the one that would change everything. He was just unloading boxes from his truck, settling into what should have been another peaceful day. But to someone peering from across the street, his presence looked like something else entirely. Because in Karen's world, a black man outside a nice house wasn't a homeowner, it was a threat. And one phone call was all it would take to prove how deep her prejudice ran. That morning began like any other. The air smelled of rain-soaked earth, and the hum of sprinklers echoed softly through the neighborhood. Marcus had just finished hauling a few heavy boxes from his truck, old photo albums, his father's tools, memories he planned to tuck neatly into the garage. But the feeling of eyes on him was unmistakable. He'd felt it before, at stores and parking lots, at job calls in the wrong zip codes. That silent weight of suspicion, heavy and familiar. Across the street, behind a perfectly trimmed hedge, Karen Whitmore watched. Her phone clutched tightly, lips pursed, eyes narrowing with every move he made. To her, Marcus didn't belong, not in this neighborhood, not in that house, not near her pristine front lawn. She didn't see a man unpacking his life. She saw a stranger, an intruder. She stepped outside, pretending to check her mail, her gaze never leaving him. Marcus nodded politely. No response. Just a stare, cold, measured, waiting for a reason. A reason she soon decided she didn't need. Minutes later, Marcus heard the faint buzz of a voice, Karen on the phone, pacing near her driveway. He couldn't make out every word, but he caught fragments. Suspicious, truck, possible break-in. His stomach sank. He froze, unsure whether to confront her or walk away. After all, he'd done nothing wrong. But that didn't always matter. Then, the distant sound of sirens. Faint at first, growing louder, closer. The sound that once meant help now filled him with dread. His hands went cold. He looked around his own yard, his own home, suddenly aware of how quickly a false story could rewrite reality. The neighbors began to peek out their windows, curtains shifting, whispers forming. Someone recorded on their phone. Marcus stood still, afraid any movement might be mistaken for defiance. The flashing lights reflected off his truck as the patrol cars rolled up. "Sir, step away from the vehicle." No one asked his name. No one asked whose house this was. They only saw what Karen had described, a black man, a truck, and an accusation. The officers approached cautiously, hands resting on their holsters. Karen watched from a distance, arms folded, lips curled into something between satisfaction and self-righteous fear. Marcus spoke calmly, explaining he was the homeowner, offering his ID, his address, his mail. But their eyes darted between him and the house, unsure, unwilling to believe what stood before them. He thought of Danielle, how many times they'd talked about this exact fear. The fear of being misunderstood, misjudged, misrepresented. And then, as one of the officers reached for his radio, Marcus's phone rang. A familiar tone, one he hadn't even realized was still on. He answered, voice trembling. "Hello." On the other end came a voice he knew better than any other, steady, composed, professional. 911 dispatch, this is Danielle. What's your emergency? For a split second, the world went quiet. The officers froze, glancing at each other. Karen's expression shifted, her confidence cracking as realization dawned. Marcus's heart pounded as he looked up, sirens still flashing, neighbors still watching. His wife, the very dispatcher managing this call, was hearing it unfold in real time. And she knew exactly who the suspect was. The tension on the street thickened, the kind of silence that only comes before everything changes. Because what happened next would not only expose a lie, it would reveal just how deep ignorance could run, and how powerful truth could be when it finally spoke back. For a long, breathless moment, no one moved. The officers stood between Marcus and his own front door, their radios crackling faintly with Danielle's steady voice echoing through the static. Then came the message that froze everyone in place, clear, direct, and unmistakably personal. "Units responding to Maplewood Lane," she said, her voice calm but carrying an edge of controlled fury. "The man at that residence is Marcus Hall. He lives there. He's my husband." The words hit like a lightning bolt. The officers exchanged stunned glances, the weight of the mistake sinking in. Karen's face drained of color, her composure cracking as she realized the enormity of what she'd set in motion. Marcus stood perfectly still, heart hammering, the red and blue lights painting his skin in harsh, shifting colors. All he'd wanted was peace, a quiet life with his wife, a home built on pride, not fear. Yet here he was on his own lawn, treated like a trespasser. An officer finally lowered his hand from his holster, muttering something under his breath, an apology that barely sounded like one. The other followed suit, stepping back, as if physical distance could erase what had just happened. But the damage was done. The neighbors had seen it all, the assumptions, the humiliation, the danger that came from one woman's fear disguised as vigilance. Karen tried to speak, to explain, but the words stumbled out half-formed. I didn't know," she said, her voice trembling. But Marcus didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. The truth was standing in front of them, undeniable and raw. Through the radio, Danielle's voice softened, barely holding together. "Marcus, are you okay?" He swallowed hard, blinking back the mix of anger and exhaustion burning in his chest. "I am now," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. The sirens faded, the crowd dispersed, and silence returned to the street, but it wasn't peace anymore. It was the kind of silence that comes after truth erupts, when masks fall and reality finally demands to be seen. Because sometimes justice doesn't shout. It speaks through the calmest voice on the line. In the days that followed, the street grew quieter, but not out of peace. The neighbors who once smiled and waved now avoided eye contact, unsure how to face the man they'd silently watched being humiliated in front of his own home. Karen resigned from the HOA, her name whispered like a cautionary tale behind closed doors. But for Marcus, the damage ran deeper than one woman's ignorance. It was a reminder that even success couldn't insulate him from suspicion. He and Danielle sat together on their porch one evening, the setting sun reflecting off the "for sale" signs that had started appearing around the block. Not because of them, but because truth had made people uncomfortable. Marcus sipped his coffee, quietly, the same hands that once saved lives trembling slightly from a different kind of exhaustion, the kind that comes from being seen as a problem before being seen as a person. He thought about how fast it all happened, how a single false assumption could turn a quiet morning into a near tragedy. And how, if not for Danielle's voice on the other end of that line, things might have ended very differently. That night, he decided he wouldn't let the story end in silence. He filed a formal complaint. He spoke at community meetings. He turned the same fear that once froze him into fuel for change. Because racism doesn't just live in headlines or history books. It lives in glances, whispers, and phone calls that start with, "I just saw someone who doesn't belong." Marcus's story became a reminder that belonging isn't granted by others, it's claimed by courage. And maybe that's what the world needs to hear most, that silence protects the problem, but speaking up protects people. So the next time you see something unfair, something unjust, ask yourself, will you be the voice that stays silent, or the one that finally answers the call?